Does consent only apply to what happens in the bedroom? Or is it something that comes up in all aspects of our lives? Do you think about consent when brushing against someone's back while moving past them at a bar? Do you think about it when asking a person to discuss something that may make them uncomfortable? This is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. I'm MC Robinson, and today I'm speaking with
Maria Lagattuta. I'm the director of the Morris Family Justice Center.
Maria and I are going to be doing a deep dive into consent. We discuss how people can recognize consent, how a lack of consent is used in abusive relationships to maintain power and control, and how you can't consent to something that could kill you. Maria explores how we all consent or don't consent to small acts in our daily lives and how difficult it can be to uncover what consent means to us after experiencing abuse. This episode will challenge you to reconsider your definition of consent, and we hope it encourages you to think about it every day. But before you listen, please take a moment to subscribe to Unsilenced wherever you get your podcasts, because it helps us to break the silence around abuse. When we think about consent, there's typically this belief that it refers to sexual encounters or it's something that exclusively happens in the bedroom. But is that true? Or does consent refer to anything?
It really does refer to anything. And consent doesn't have to, like, if we're consenting with our friends about what movie we're watching or where we're going to dinner, we're getting that permission from the other person. There's been a lot of research on allowing children to consent to hugging their relatives if they don't feel comfortable hugging their relatives. And what do we do as the adults? Oh, hug Aunt Margaret. They're
Yeah.
the best person ever. And you see the look in a kid's face, and just how a lot of that research is showing us that early on, teaching a child consent and their own autonomy really does later on relate to consent in the bedroom.
Yeah, and I do wonder also, by kind of forcing a child to do something that they don't want, it's also maybe teaching them not to know their own boundaries, which is interesting and not
Mhm.
something that I think we talk about. But you talked a little bit about some forms of consent that aren't sexual related. Could you talk a little bit or give some more examples of other forms of consent that aren't sexual and where that can kind of show up?
In my job here, if someone is crying, I'm not going to hug them, but I'm going to say, hey, is it okay for me to sit next to you?
Mhm.
Because even that sitting next to someone, if they don't consent to it, if they don't feel comfortable with it, they're not going to feel comfortable even talking to me. I do
Interesting.
something with people. It's called co-regulated breathing. Like, I will breathe with you, but I will ask, hey, can I put my hand on your shoulder so that there's a connection and when we're breathing together? And sometimes I will get no. And I was like, okay, so will you breathe with me? And even that, asking someone, hey, can you breathe with me so that we can calm down and we can breathe together and slow your limbic system down? That's getting consent.
Yeah. I love that example though, because particularly that one, you see somebody crying, you're like, oh, I know what they need. I'm gonna hug them. I'm gonna make them feel, better in this way. But, the intention is good. It's not necessarily that we're saying that every time there's not consent, there's an evil intention, because in that instance, the intent is good, but the impact could still be that the person feels uncomfortable. So I
Yep.
think that's a really, really interesting piece of this. And something that you also showed me in those articles that you sent was basically the importance of practicing consent in basically every interaction that we have.
I don't know, about a month or so ago, I went to my friend had a baby shower and I hadn't met her mom yet. And that was the first thing I did when I walked in. I was like, can I hug you? Like, I feel like I know this woman and I
Yeah.
wanted to hug her. And I'm like, who's this crazy lady walking in the house? So I did. I asked her, I said, can I hug you? I feel like I know you. And she's like, of course. Right. But I
Mm.
did get her consent and it was a social setting. And I don't think anyone would have questions my motives. But again, this is a woman I had never met before.
Yeah.
But I knew her through my friend, through her daughter. So I was like,
Mhm.
hey, can I hug you?
Yeah.
And she said yes.
No, but it's so empowering too to be able to make a decision, you know? And I think whenever people say that, like, oh, can I hug you? Like, are you okay with hugs? Like, I feel like, you know what? That's so nice that you would ask. And of course, for me, the answer is always yes. But it's just the fact that they're giving you the option. It's just very, it reminds you to think about consent, you know? And in a way that, to your point, it's not just exclusively like, hey, like, are you okay with this sexual encounter? Like, are you okay with if we do that? It really normalizes consent in every single situation that we have. So, can you talk a little bit more about how consent could show up emotionally? Like, could you have like emotional consent to things or physical consent? Like, what are the buckets, if you know?
I think when we talk about emotional consent too, we're talking about like what boundaries do we set up? Do we feel comfortable talking about something, maybe super vulnerable?
Yeah.
I know there have been times where people have asked me questions. Is it okay for me to ask this?
Hmm.
So they're getting my consent, whether, and sometimes I'll say, sure, I have no problem answering that. Or
Yeah.
sometimes I'm like, I'm not ready to answer that yet. I'm not
Mhm.
comfortable with that. Even like when I'm doing therapy, I will say to people, I'm going to challenge you and I'm going to ask you something really hard. You don't need to answer. I'm prepping them with a little bit of consent, but there's that verbal consent I'm allowing them to take. Because if I'm asking something really difficult,
Yeah.
now different when I'm in a relationship as a therapist versus a friend,
Right.
but I'm still giving them the space to consent to having this difficult conversation. So yeah, that is emotional consent. But I'm gonna, like, if it's with a friend and maybe putting up a boundary and saying, I'm not ready to have this conversation yet.
Right. I mean, I love that. And that's something that I've also tried to do is like if I ask people questions, I'm like a questioner. I ask people questions all the time on the podcast
It's
too.
your
It's
job.
literally my job. No, but and I'll say like, don't feel a need to answer this. Like you don't have to answer, but blah blah blah. And then a lot of times they do or they don't. And but it gives them I'm not deciding for them. And it's really cool to think about it consent in that way because I think like I said we're so conditioned to think about it solely in the context of romantic relationships or sexual assaults. And I do kind of want to break down just for some people if you could give some concrete examples, like let's take it to the relationship part of this. If you could give some concrete examples about what consent does not look like in a relationship versus what consent does look like, I think it would be really helpful.
So that definition that I used of consent always being about negotiating.
Mm,
So just because I had sex with you once doesn't mean I'm consenting to have sex with you all the time.
mhm,
It's really, and it is looking for the, am I uncomfortable? You can say no in the middle, and that
mhm,
is honoring someone's consent. So again, just because I kissed you once doesn't mean you're going to let me kiss you a second time.
right.
That's that negotiating back and forth. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about consent is we're always getting consent.
Mhm,
So because I did it once doesn't mean the second time is okay or the third time, or if I'm married for 50 years,
mhm,
there are
mhm,
times where I might say no.
mhm.
Not saying anything does not mean that that's consent. So sometimes people feel uncomfortable saying no, I'm not comfortable, but they maybe shy back a little bit and don't respond. I didn't hear an affirmative, enthusiastic yes.
Mhm,
So if I'm being asked to engage in a romantic, intimate relationship, and I'm like,
mhm.
there's no enthusiastic yes. And if my partner can read my face, they're going to be like, okay, she's not comfortable. Let's. However, it would be easier for my partner if I said, no, I'm not comfortable with this.
Right.
However, how have we been socialized too?
Mhm,
So if we're socialized to not speak up and not be assertive,
mhm.
then how does our person know if I am consenting or not.
And it can be hard. And that's why in those articles where it said, the lack of saying no doesn't necessarily mean yes is so
Right.
powerful. And I think it also really twists things a little on their head of how we're used to thinking about it. Well, she didn't say no, or he didn't say no, or they didn't say no. So, that's yes. And it's like, I was a Title IX investigator in my old job. And one of the things we looked for was like, just because someone doesn't say no, are they engaging? To your point, is there an enthusiastic reaction to what's happening? And if there's not, then that is indicative of like a lack of consent. But another thing that I do want to touch upon that you kind of got into is this belief, though, that people do think kind of like in a married relationship. You see it a lot online of like, well, we're married. I can't, you know, assault my spouse. We're married. And what would you say kind of in response to that?
If your partner doesn't say yes unequivocally or give the smile and the response, like that there is this mutual give and take, then ask, is
Mhm.
this okay? Um, and I think what's hard is that biology works different than consent.
Right.
The biology may still do whatever biology is supposed to do,
Hmm.
but I might not consent just because my biology is working.
Right. There could be
And
like
I think,
arousal, but not consent.
right. And I think that that's what's really difficult too when we talk about sexual assault, because there's this piece that maybe it does sort of feel good,
Hmm.
but it's not what I wanted. And so now you have this conflict where when people are asked about sexual assault,
Hmm.
the one person may say, oh, but they were aroused, they responded, their body responded, but that doesn't mean my head and my heart are responding. So
Mm.
that's where some of that conflict can also come in when it comes to sexual assault.
I love that. And I think it's an incredibly important thing to talk about, particularly like if we're thinking about, domestic violence too. This narrative also that we touched upon that like you can't assault your spouse or, it's not rape if she's your wife or he's your husband. And I think that that can just be very dangerous. And I'm wondering how consent could be used in power and control. Like, is there much consent in a power and control relationship?
I, how many human beings have walked in and have said that they've been raped by their spouse?
Hmm.
So the power and control can come in. Well, you are my spouse. You are supposed to, what's the saying? Having my needs met.
Yes.
Well, I need my needs to be met, or I'm gonna step out on this relationship. So how does that power and control? I don't feel comfortable, but you're just telling me that you're gonna step out on a relationship. So, okay, is that consent? Is that true consent? No, that's I'm afraid my partner's gonna step out on us.
Mm-hmm.
So how do I figure that out? Or if I've been raised with, this is what you do, this is your duty, this is your job as a woman in a marriage, this is your job. Do I have a choice if it's my job?
It's interesting you bring that up because I also feel there's this belief with men that could also be used like that of like men always want sex. Like, what do you mean? Like, if you don't want me, like, why? What's wrong there? And I also feel power and control can come in that vein too of like, well, you're not a real man then, or what are you, gay or something like that, trying to be derogatory towards them. And it's just like this cycle that would then also keep them in this non-consensual activity. The other thing, though, outside of the sexual piece, is there other ways that consent or a lack of consent can be used? Like if you look at the power and control wheel, like for instance, financial abuse. How does consent play into that?
Oh, wow. How many times does someone not have access to their bank account?
Yeah.
So they cannot consent to how their money is being used.
Hmm.
We have people who get an allowance. I'm not talking about like a 1950s allowance like I Love Lucy, where we laugh about it.
Right.
But I'm talking about where people get like $50 a week to buy the groceries. And then you need to bring me the change so I can see and account for every penny.
Yeah.
So now if I want to get, I don't know, if I want to get Dunkin' Donuts on my way home and I don't have permission
Mm.
from my partner, I can't consent to go get that cup of coffee. And if I do go get that cup of coffee, if I use my autonomy to go get that cup of coffee because that is what I want, what's going to happen when I go home, especially if there's that financial abuse.
I think that really highlights it well, how you basically you're asking permission from somebody else for everything because you have to, because that's
Mhm.
how it's really tied up in it. And I'm wondering, how does having a lack of consent hurt victims of abuse in their life? What does it do to them?
They don't know how to make their own decision. I can't tell you how many times we have had a conversation with someone and we don't tell them what to do. I've sat here and I've said to people, I cannot tell you what to do. These are your choices.
Right.
But all of a sudden, if I'm giving a choice to someone who doesn't ever feel like they have the option to have a choice, it can be paralyzing for some
Mm.
people.
Hmm.
So they struggle with even being able to make a decision. Well, if my partner has told me when and how I'm supposed to have sex, and when and how I'm supposed to spend money, and when and how I'm supposed to do whatever household chores, etc. Now you're coming to JBWS and we're saying, okay, well, you have this choice, this, or this choice.
Mm.
And they become paralyzed with not being able to make a decision. And
Mm.
I have had people sit here and look at me in the face and say, well, you tell me, what would you do? I'm like, I'm not going to tell you, but these are your choices. What do you think works best for you?
Wow.
And that is paralyzing for some people.
Yeah, because it strips their autonomy, but it's also designed to do that, right? Because if
Mhm.
people felt empowered and sure of themselves, then maybe they would be more likely to leave the relationship. So by having this kind of consent taken away, having their autonomy taken away, it also leads them, I think, right? Doesn't it lead them to like kind of doubt their reality and doubt what they feel is true or what they believe?
Absolutely. Or they start to question their sanity. Am I crazy? Or they think there is nothing out there for them. This is my normal. I deserve to be abused. I deserve this treatment. Um, and it's really hard because, I know I can only speak for myself, but I come at it from you have dignity by virtue of being a human being
Right.
and sitting in front of me. And I have had people cry saying, I don't know why I stay, but I can't leave. I'm
Mm-hmm.
afraid to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And so then how do we honor someone's dignity and humanity when they struggle to make that decision?
Yeah. And how, I'm curious if you can even answer this, but how do you start to work with people to get them to like rebuild that trust in themselves after they've had kind of their consent taken away so often?
I think it's really, really, really difficult when I'm in a therapy session. I
Hmm.
will encourage people to think about the times when they've made a decision that worked out really well for them.
Mm,
I also talk a lot about how courage and fear live right next to each other.
right.
We can't do one without the other. The example I use is we think of our firefighters as heroes,
Hmm.
and they are. How much courage does it take to go into a burning building? And in the same token, hopefully there's a little level of fear when they're
Right.
walking into that burning building, like,
Yeah.
I need to go home to my family.
Hmm.
Courage and fear live right next to each other.
Hmm.
And I don't believe you can have one without the other.
Right.
So how do we encourage, look, there's that word, encourage.
Hmm.
Part of the word is courage. How
Hmm.
do we encourage people to take those scary steps?
Yeah. I love that. It's really important work. And I'm also wondering, do you think if people have struggled with non-consensual things throughout the relationship, different methods of power and control, do you think it's difficult for them to also notice what consent is and start to recognize that they're even consenting or not consenting? Like, is that even like a concept that occurs?
That's a really excellent point, MC. I hadn't even thought of that, but
Yeah.
right, if I'm giving you permission or I'm asking you, hey, is it okay for me to hug you?
Yeah.
And I'm looking for their consent,
Do they know?
do they even realize that?
It makes me wonder, and maybe there isn't a way to figure this out yet, but if people can work on reflecting on what consent is, on do they want this? And maybe it is just, asking yourself in this situation, like, do I want Maria to hug me? And like actually like asking the question. I wonder
Mhm.
if that is part of it. I don't know. What do you think?
It's starting to build that muscle. Maybe that's really what it is. It's starting to build that muscle. So I'm modeling for them that idea of asking.
Yeah.
And then, like you think about all the times, how many times people go back and drop restraining orders and go back and get restraining orders and they have certain feelings about themselves about why they go back.
Mm-hmm.
But then we also talk about the courage it takes to make that choice and that they made that choice for their safety, their family's safety. And maybe that's where this idea of consent comes in. They are not consenting to the way they've been treated.
Right.
And now I am making a choice to walk away from this.
hmm and this is such a good point that I didn't even think about when preparing for this, but there I think is this belief societally because you hear it, right? Well, why don't you just leave? Why do you stay? There is an implied consent though that these people are thinking, the victim of abuse or the person experiencing abuse is somehow choosing consenting to stay. When is that always true or is it just that difficult to leave?
That is brilliant, MC. No, because people stay for 100 different reasons.
Oh,
People stay because financially, how are they going to support their family, especially if they've been the stay-at-home parent and not working?
yes.
And how often we hear, but I don't want to break my family up. I want my children to know their mother, their father, their whoever.
Yes.
I don't want to break my family up. Will I be able to do this without my partner?
Mm,
Right? That's where fear and courage live right next to each other.
right.
People think they don't have a choice.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
People think they can't do it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So it was on social media, oh gosh, 5, 6 years ago. And it was during Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And it was those questions. Why do we ask why she doesn't leave?
Yeah.
And it really went through all of those reasons around fear, family, finances,
Mm-hmm.
even societal thoughts.
Yeah.
Like, as much as we're working on breaking stigma, that stigma is still there.
Yes.
How could you let him hit you? How could you let him put his hands on you?
Yes. Like they are consenting to it or that they have
Like,
decided.
I'm sorry, I didn't let him, he did it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. I did an episode, I think it was Tamu King that was talking about like, well, why did you put yourself in that position? And it's like it's so interesting. Kind of reminds me of how people say, oh, you were dressed like that, so you deserved what happened to you. Because it almost feels like you're saying that these people are making a choice to be abused. And who would ever choose that? I wonder when people say these things, if they really hear themselves. Do you know what I mean? Because it's so ridiculous.
It's coming from a place of judgment. So then if I am if I am that victim, I am going to feel judged.
Yeah.
I'm going to feel judged to share my story.
Yeah.
I'm going to feel judged. What is my family going to say? What if this person is my children's other parent?
Mhm.
What are people going to think of that person? So I so when we talk about like how we stay quiet and we don't give consent because there potentially is a whole can of worms that's going to open up when I speak my truth.
Yeah.
No, I did not give consent for this person to lay their hands on me or to strangle me. But no, I didn't give consent. But why does the rest of the world think I allowed it to happen? Oh, right, because I stayed, because I have 10 reasons why I'm choosing to stay.
Yes. It's literally like blaming somebody who got robbed at a store for the robbery. It's like nobody would do that. Nobody would ever do that. So it's interesting in domestic violence, sexual assault, stuff like that. There is this belief of, well, you're staying. And the truth is, these situations have been designed so people can't leave. Like it's not easy to leave.
No.
But I did hear what you said about consent and strangulation. So if you do want to kind of go
Yeah.
into that, I think that's a very interesting piece. And just to set it up, we have been talking about strangulation, which is kind of colloquially known as choking, and how that you inherently can't consent to something that could potentially kill you. So could you talk about kind of how choking that people talk about, how it is strangulation, kind of not just what we think of as choking.
By definition, choking is internal. So I'm choking on a piece of food, I'm choking on
Right.
saliva, I'm choking on some water. Strangulation is anything that happens externally and that there's force on the neck.
Right.
I do know that, you know, lots of people will strangle during sex
Yeah.
for 100 reasons. They're like, oh, it's what's the word I'm looking for? It arouses them more. There's been a lot of research and some of like I think I was telling you the BDSM
Yeah.
community is really starting to say that you cannot consent to strangulation because it can kill you. You can lose consciousness within 5 seconds
Yeah.
of being strangled.
Hmm.
So how can you consent to something that can kill you? One of the what was it? The nationals,
Coalition for Sexual Freedom.
they are going to do a month. I don't know when they're doing it on choking awareness. They're calling it choking awareness
Right.
because that's the colloquial. But again, that the harm that can be
Yeah.
caused. So if the brain does not get oxygen for 5 seconds, the brain cells can start to die.
Right. Yeah.
If you are strangled hard enough, you can get a TBI. All of these muscles and ligatures and stuff in your neck can break. They're,
Yeah.
you know, carotid dissections. So they don't always see them unless it's through like a CAT scan or an
Right.
MRI.
Yes.
If people are strangled hard enough, they'll get petechia in their eyes.
Hmm.
So all of these things, it's dangerous. Someone can die, someone can become permanently damaged. And that is why these communities are starting to say you cannot consent to strangulation or choking because again, it can kill you.
Yeah, and I know we've talked about this, but I even think the use of the term choking dilutes the severity of it because strangulation is a crime, right? So,
Strangulation is a crime. Yes.
so
The
if you're
second
saying
degree felony.
so you're not going to say, oh, like strangle me, but like you see things online where people, I've said to you, are like, oh, choke me, daddy, but you're not going to hear somebody say strangle me, daddy. Like it kind of takes the weight down from here to here. And then people do. I mean, you've seen it a lot lately of people engaging in strangulation during sex. And they think that it's not. Like, it's like, oh, they're just lightly compressing, or no, like my partner and I, like we have a different relationship. Like, it's not that. But I think what you said is really, really, really important. And that is you can't consent to something that will kill you. Can you
Right.
just break that down a little bit more? Why can't you consent to something that could kill you?
If you lose consciousness in 3 or 4 seconds, how are you going to stop your partner from continuing to strangle you? If they think you're saying okay.
Good point.
And the same the same comes up when people are intoxicated or blackout drunk.
Mhm.
How can they consent if they're not aware of what's happening?
Yeah,
So they really can't. They
right.
can't say no.
Yes, and I think it's interesting
They
though.
also can't say yes at that point,
That's
but
what I was gonna say because like the entire thing that we've been talking about this whole episode is about how a lack of a no is not a yes, but a lack of an anything when that is happening, how could that ever be consensual if, you lose consciousness to your point? Because you can't say, "Oh, I really like this," or stop because you're unconscious. And how easy is it to go that far?
and that's the problem because you can lose consciousness so quickly
Hmm.
that sometimes I don't think people realize that or recognize that. One of the things I had sent you, I'm just looking really quick. Incapacitation, here it is. Individuals who are incapacitated due to alcohol, drugs, or other reasons cannot give valid consent.
Yes. Yeah.
So if I am passed out because there's not oxygen going to my brain because my partner and I engaged in choking or strangulation during sex,
Yeah.
I can't consent. I am incapacitated.
Yes. And I think if you put it like that, we've done a lot of work societally of like, okay, if you're drunk, you can't consent. So if you have the potential to lose consciousness or to get a traumatic brain injury, a TBI, then how could you consent? And it is interesting though, because I think this has also come up because like I've talked about this with people and they've said like, oh, but it's different for me. Like, I consented going into it or I trust my partner. But how do you think, I mean, if you could break this down a little bit, that normalization of choking, strangulation could also make people that are victims of abuse not recognize when their partner is strangling them. Because I think your statistics said in intimate partner violence, if the partner strangles their partner, that there's like a 750% more likely to be victims of homicide, right?
Homicide, yes. The studies were with heterosexual couples that if the man strangled, the female was 750 times more likely to die by homicide.
And what worries me in these situations, I know we've talked about this, is that if a man is having sex with his partner, who's a woman, and he starts to strangle her, and there's this like belief in society, oh, that's normal. Like, we were just talking about how they like to get a little kinky and they do the same thing, like my friends. So this is what they're talking about. And I think there's that fear also of going too far and of not recognizing the abuse outside of this. I mean, beyond the fact that the act can't be consensual because it could kill you very quickly and easily. I think there's also, by normalizing it, you're also reducing people's ability to recognize dynamics of power and control that might be at
Yeah.
play.
Some of the people who do strangle, it is about control. Like I've got your life in my hands.
Yes,
And I listen, I don't know enough if that's what's happening in sexual strangulation.
right.
I would, but when it comes to in power and control, and I'm going to strangle my partner,
Right.
I have the power to hurt you, but I'm not going to. It's going to stop just short of hurting you. And
Right.
then how does that also create fear? But
Yeah.
I'm not, again, not consenting to having someone's hands around my neck.
Yeah. And if they are, and that fear is present, and every time you have sex or it happens occasionally, then you're probably never going to want to say no to your partner having sex because you're afraid, like, oh, if you don't do this, like, look what I can do. I mean,
Look
it's
what I,
very sneaky, like it's insidious. And I think, this deserves like a whole episode about this, honestly. It's a very interesting topic, but I think it really relates to consent. Um, and just thinking before we kind of wrap this episode, are there any other avenues you want to talk about regarding consent or how people could recognize somebody is consenting or anything that you feel like we should touch upon?
think going back to like where it all started with that non-sexual consent.
Yes.
don't touch someone unless they've kind of given you permission. Like you
Right.
think about it too, a handshake is consent to touch or
Right.
a fist pump or something like that.
That's such a good point.
Um, but let's start there. Let's learn when someone is saying, yes, it's okay to touch me. Yes, it's okay. Can I sit next to you? I'm
Hmm.
not necessarily touching you, but can I sit next to you?
Right.
If we're going to go out to a movie, let's all consent to the same movie or negotiate the
Yeah.
movie we're going to see or where we're going to go out to eat.
Hmm.
That is part of negotiating and consent.
Yeah.
And if consent is about negotiating, how are we going to negotiate those things that start at the very beginning?
Yeah. I love the
I even
idea.
see it at home with my own kids every once in a while. Like I go to hug my daughter, her mom,
Yeah.
and she's like, "Don't touch me."
Yeah.
Right? But I have to respect that. Right? I should just be like, "You're mine." Right? Could you imagine if I just like, "You're mine"?
Yeah. But that is something that people do think. And it's interesting because I can already hear like comments of people being like, oh, people have gotten so weak. Like we never consented to things. Like you just do things because that's your duty.
Right.
And like, what do you say in response to people who say, like, well, that's just what you do as a kid. Like that's how you be respectful. Like you need to respect your elders by doing this. Like what is your response? Because I have seen this online where people are like, oh, like, come on, like, really, like, you're gonna care about consent in this situation. Like, you've gotten so, like, weak.
I'm going to care about it because I want my daughter to know that it is okay for her to say no. It is okay for her to not want to be touched by
Yeah,
me, a partner, her brother,
yeah,
like, and I get it. I get it because we come at it from, we hug our grandparents, we hug our aunts and uncles,
yeah,
and that is how we show affection. And we like, I was definitely socialized to that. I hug my family,
yeah,
but not everybody is socialized that way.
yeah,
And I have had people hug me where I didn't feel comfortable and I didn't want to be hugged.
yeah,
And what do? I retreat into myself like this. Like
yeah,
I'm even doing it because like I'm
yeah,
imagining, I'm like, oh, don't hug me.
yeah.
And but did I say no?
Mm,
Nope, because I was socialized.
yeah,
You know what? And when someone gives you a hug, you
yeah.
reciprocate it, even though if you're like,
Yeah, and you feel weird sometimes being like, "Oh no, I don't hug," or then people will be like, "Wow, what's wrong with her? She doesn't hug." Like what a jerk. Like, do you know what I mean? But it is really interesting. I really find this empowering and fascinating that we can practice being more consensual in everything and just kind of obviously, like I feel then people are like, "Oh, you can take it to an extreme," but you know, just being like, yeah, can I hug you? Can I sit here? Can I ask this question? Like, are you in a space where like you can receive this? And I think it's interesting is the people who have a problem with it, I also think like, why? Like, what is the problem with making another person feel comfortable?
comfortable. Well, if we make the phone call, when we call people from here, are you in a safe place to talk?
Yes.
Is, I mean, isn't that consent too? Hey, are you safe to talk? And
Yeah.
if they say no, okay, tell me a good time I can call you back.
Yes. Yeah.
So even that asking, is it okay to talk now? I am negotiating with you. I am getting your permission.
Yes.
And
Input.
maybe if we change the word consent to permission,
Yeah.
does that feel more organic for some people?
It's honestly just human kindness and
Mhm.
recognizing that you're a person that comes to life with different beliefs and attitudes and thoughts and traumas and being cognizant of just it doesn't take what is it 12 seconds to be like can I hug you instead of oh my God like it's not
No, MC, that took you 3 seconds.
exactly
If that long.
exactly so I think that's awesome and I think it's something, I feel like we should challenge people to do, if really get someone's consent instead of just putting something on the TV. Like, do we all want to watch this? Is it just me? Like, that buy-in, I just think makes things feel a lot more equal. I really loved how Maria challenged us to think differently about consent throughout this episode. I really feel there's so much power in reflecting on how we can be consensual in all aspects of daily life. Maria, thank you so much. I love having you on the podcast, and I think this is a really important conversation. I hope you come back in 2 weeks to listen to another episode of Unsilenced because education is the first step in ending domestic violence. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations About Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services, or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible.